So good morning and thanks for joining us today. This learning session is going to explore the importance of outdoor play for child health and examine some data on the impact of green schoolyards. The workshop is being recorded, so everybody has been placed on mute. You can listen in either via telephone or computer speakers. We would like you to introduce yourself in chat, your name and how you're working on school health. As well as the organization that you're representing would be great. If you have questions, those should be put in the Q&A box so that they don't get lost in the chat. And then we'll be following up with an email that will have a PDF of the slides and a link to the recording, which will be posted on YouTube. For those, and I think everyone on right now knows who we are. I'm with Action for Healthy Kids. We've been around for 22 years now, since Dr. David Satcher, who is the Surgeon General, announced there was an obesity epidemic, and a group was brought in and determined it would be best to work through schools and try to get our children on the right path by improving nutrition and physical activity opportunities. So a team from Texas went to this meeting and came back and started working on policies and working with school districts. Our organization has provided grants and support through this whole time. Our Texas team is still working. We're the only working team left from the original 50 states, but we will continue to support school health. We have a great group of partners that work with us. And we provide a lot of work around school health advisory councils as well. Visit the Action for Healthy Kids website if you get a chance. And if you're not a member, you might want to join. We have a monthly newsletter that will give you information on any upcoming webinars or other activities, grants that might be coming up. So be sure and sign up if you haven't joined and explore all the different tip sheets and information we have available on our website. One last bit of information before I turn this over to our nature experts. We have entered a partnership agreement with USDA on their Healthy Meals Incentives Initiative, and we are working with them on grants. So there are grants for small and rural school districts around improving your school meals. These funds can be used for equipment, staffing, even school gardens. If you've got initiatives that you've been working on and you're trying to find a funding source for it, this is a $150,000 grant over 2 years. It also will involve some technical assistance from Action for Healthy Kids and our partner RMC Health, and we will be able to access Chef and their work and resources. So the deadline is May 26th. If you know of small districts in your area, even if you're a large district, please share this with those small districts. I've been at the MegaCon, which is a Department of Agriculture meeting yesterday, and we'll be going back today and tomorrow, and have talked to several small districts who are really excited they'll be able to do some things for the first time in several years. So that's our good news. I'm Michelle Smith. I don't think I introduced myself in the beginning. I'm the Senior Field Manager for Action for Healthy Kids and have been the Texas State Coordinator for almost 20 years. We have two excellent presenters today. I'm really thrilled to have Sara Coles, who also serves on our steering committee. Sarah is the Executive Director for Children in Nature, and Kevin Lanza, who is an Assistant Professor with UTHealth Houston School of Public Health, and I'll let them share more information about their work and who they are as they do their presentation. And for now, I'm going to turn it over to them.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much for inviting us to join today. As Michelle said, my name is Sara Coles. I'm the Executive Director of Texas Children in Nature Network. I have been working in this field for a number of years and really are working to ensure equitable access and connection to nature for all children in Texas. And then I'll let Kevin introduce himself real quick.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. Kevin Lanza here. I'm an assistant professor at UTHealth, School of Public Health. I'm actually at the Austin Regional Campus, where our main campus is in Houston. And so excited to be here with you all today.
So just to get us started, in case any of you aren't familiar with Texas Children in Nature Network and what we do, we are a statewide nonprofit working on a collective impact model, which means we are working to engage all of our over 700 partners in fulfilling their mission to get more children outside. And we do that through a variety of ways, primarily through resource sharing, having a common agenda, and doing lots of communication among the groups. We work in 9 regions across the state. Here we have a few of them. Kevin actually serves as one of our Austin regional leaders. And so we've got folks that are local in each of those regions that a lot of our partners work with really closely beyond working with the state office as well. So just a little bit of overview of why time outdoors. I'm going to dig a little deeper into the healthier physically and mentally as we go through this presentation, but also we know that kids who regularly play and learn outdoors do better in school, in that they are performing better on standardized tests, they have better attention spans, they are able to socially and emotionally be more present during school because they're able to self-regulate, they have better self-discipline, they're more creative, and there's lots of really great benefits that come from time outdoors. All of our research that we'll talk about today, and then also all of this stuff is up on our website. Please feel free to check it out. I'm also happy, Michelle, if you are willing, if you want to share out the presentation, happy for that as well. All of the stuff I'm going to reference is going to be linked. So just a few kind of general healthier physically and mentally benefits for kids today. And all of these things also work for adults. We're talking about kids today, but all of these things also affect you as an adult in the amount of time that you're spending outdoors as well. We see mental health benefits, physical health benefits, respiratory health is definitely affected. And I know Kevin's going to be talking about some of those things in his talk as well. And then increased physical activity, and just a little bit of the data that we're seeing coming out. Many of you have probably already seen the 2021 numbers that came out from the CDC in terms of our kids and mental health. This is broken down a little bit more over youth in Texas, but we are seeing a huge jump in both depression and anxiety, and then also suicidal ideation with our kids right now. And that's even highlighted more when we're looking at girls and we're looking at children of color. And so we're really seeing some trends that are concerning to a lot of our mental health experts, as well as our public health experts, in terms of the mental health of our youth. And we also know that kids who spend time outside are able to see reductions in rumination, in cortisol levels, in our anxiety levels. We see all that stuff happening through a variety of ways. One is a theory that we're seeing more and more research come out about is actually the chemicals that are within trees and the leaves. They are off-gassing a chemical that actually helps our bodies. We are also seeing just the idea of the fresh air, vitamin D is having a positive effect, but also we're seeing self-regulation really come into effect. Kids are able to really process their own feelings and emotions a lot more when they're outside as opposed to when they are indoors. So some of that research that we're seeing, I've linked a few things, but we're definitely seeing some drastic reductions in cortisol levels from kids when they're spending time outdoors. Courtney Krim and Laura Allen at Trinity University are doing some really great research based on their students at the university, which are 18, 19-year-olds. So maybe not what we normally think of as kids, but when you're 18 and 19, they're still kids. And so they are looking at the cortisol levels for their kids that they're working at, literally at the beginning of class and the end of class, depending on when they've spent time outdoors, and they're seeing reduction that way. We're seeing reduction of cortisol levels in hair over a longer intervention period. We're seeing even self-reporting for kids. They're saying like, I feel less anxious. I feel better when I'm spending time outside. This is, a lot of you are probably familiar with the LINK project. Debbie Ray has some great research coming out soon about hair cortisol levels with that as well. So be on the lookout. I think last time I checked with her, this paper should be coming out in the next month or so. So fingers crossed that should be released soon. And she's seen, as you can see here, a real drop from the control group to the kids that spent more time outdoors in terms of their cortisol levels in their hair. We also see that kids who spend time outside regularly, and particularly in nature-based outdoor spaces, are a lot more active. So here is a study from 2008 done by the Natural Learning Institute, and they took a traditional playground space and looked to see how active kids were. And they are pretty clustered in a few areas and are relatively sedentary. The yellow here is primarily sedentary. And then they took the exact same kids, exact same school, but they changed out the playground space and they made it so it was more nature-based. And you will automatically see the kids are a lot more spread out. They are running around a little bit more, and they've switched from primarily sedentary to primarily moderate activity levels. And then this vigorous went from 12% to 30%. So they saw a pretty drastic uptick in terms of how active kids were. And these are kids who are already getting outdoors as part of their time at school. But by changing the type of space that had more trees, it had more natural elements, it had a looping pathway where kids could run around in a circle or play in that way, they really got a lot more active just by changing their outdoor space. Again, just a little bit more evidence of having this outdoor space and having it be nature-based does make kids more active. Kids want to explore the space. They want to see what's going on. It keeps them a lot more engaged mentally as well than a traditional plastic playground because there's not that muscle memory. Or we also see sometimes kids like to try and up the risk level a little bit more with some of that more traditional outdoor space as well. Seeing kids kind of trying to walk on top of the monkey bars as opposed to use their arms on them and so on as well. We also, this is a really interesting study in terms of social connectedness. There's some really interesting research coming out, particularly looking at middle schoolers and how important nature is for their social connectedness. If you think about that age group is really where that development is happening. They're learning how to be friends with folks on their own. They're learning how to interact with a whole lot of different people. And they're starting to really form deep friendships amongst their peers. And so we are seeing that development happens a lot more in natural spaces, and particularly in blue space. So you've probably heard a lot of people talk about green space, and that means outdoor space with grasses and trees and things that we think about as being green. Blue space means it's somewhere near water, or where you can see a vast sky. So where you can see something that would be qualified as blue a lot more. And kind of the thought behind the blue space, particularly water, as being something that is fostering that social connectedness is actually the sound of the water. So if you think about, at that age, they're probably starting to have more deep conversations with each other, and having that background noise of the water is probably really soothing. You're able to connect on a deeper level with that background sound happening. As I talked about, we see depression and anxiety reducing. We see high blood pressure and diabetes reduction for kids who are spending more time outside. And part of this is based on the increased activity level. And also for schools that have gardens, they're also really looking at how the school gardens are affecting healthy eating habits as well for these students. So again, talked a little bit more about this. Is just the promotion of social and emotional skills through being outside. You're learning to work together. You are learning to have those conversations with each other. And so some really great things are happening because kids are playing and learning outside. Again, happy to share all of this research with all of you. And then when we think about students with adverse childhood experiences, so we are seeing more and more students entering care because of ACEs across the country. And we've really been doing some great work with agencies across the country, particularly in Texas. We've been working with Casey Family Programs on how we can engage kids in the outdoors to help the healing process. So looking at how nature can have a positive impact on the idea of permanency, that you belong somewhere, that you have a sense of place, and that you are connected with the adults in your lives. And that leads into family connectedness. So being able to spend time outdoors together without devices, having that quality time together can be really healing for these kids, either as a family or the other adults that they are with at that time of their life. Safety, they are able to create a sense of safety with their families, having lots of what we call parallel walking conversations, where they're able to dig into with maybe a counselor some issues that they're having related to their adverse childhood experiences. And doing that parallel walking outdoors allows them to have those conversations that may be a little bit more difficult to have in an office, primarily because they're not looking, when you think about teenagers, they're maybe not wanting to sit and look at someone in the eye when they're having these conversations. So they're able to have that conversation, but they're also outdoors and being able to have that sensory input from the outdoors as part of that time, which helps them open up. As I was saying, self-regulation is a big thing that comes into play with being outdoors. It helps with attention spans. It helps with being able to take a deep breath and think through and kind of take a beat and when you're reacting to things. And all of that kind of leads to the healing process as part of that process for these kids. A couple more really big things that happen: green exercise. Research is showing that you actually get more benefits from exercising outdoors than you do from exercising in the gym. It's better for your heart. It's better for your muscles, and because you're not on a flat surface, you're going up hills, going over rocks. It helps with your joint development. We are seeing that kids are lacking in terms of balance and healthy ankles and so on. And a lot of that stuff can happen from playing outdoors and having the not an even surface from a gym, but having to kind of figure out how to work a little bit more with their core and their muscle groups. And then one of the most important things for our teenagers, and us as adults as well, is being outside really does help with our sleep. It helps set you on a regular pattern for sleep, which can be really important, especially in those teenage years for mental health as well. So we have a couple of interventions that we work with for this. One, I'm gonna come back to green schoolyards and then throw it over to Kevin, but the other two are really related. One is Ole, Texas. There's an exclamation point, so we should be excited when you say that. It's Ole, Texas, which stands for Outdoor Learning Environments. And this is for our youngest Texans. We are working with Department of State Health Services and several other state agencies to look at how we can put outdoor learning environments in early childcare centers across the state. Because going back to the idea of preventing obesity and getting kids more active, it is helping to kind of set those healthy habits early for kids, and also helping them get ready for school, because as we talked about a little bit before with their schools, in terms of test grades and learning things like that, they're a little bit more pre-K, they're a little more kindergarten ready through this OLE project. And then we are also working on recess policy, looking at how we are getting kids outside on a regular basis during the school day, giving them a break, giving them a chance to play during the day. We do have a couple of policies in place already. In early childhood centers, kids have to be outside 60 minutes per day. Does not say if that's structured or unstructured play in the policy, but they do have to be outside for 60 minutes. And then in elementary, most school districts have to be active for 30 minutes of the day, but again, it doesn't say what that needs to be. It could be PE, it could be recess. So both of those things kind of lean into green schoolyards. So the idea behind green schoolyards is it's not just a place for recess, it's a place for outdoor learning. So we're looking at places that have outdoor classrooms, places for exploration. So kids can go out and take their lessons outdoors and really see how that is played out in the real world. We see the loose parts being a big part of that, because it helps with our STEM, our science, technology, engineering, and math, being able to build stuff, have hands-on experiences. And that's where a lot of our school gardens come into play as well. School gardens are great for a whole lot more than your plants lesson, as I'm sure all of you know. It is a place for kids to get their hands in the dirt. It's a place for kids to learn about how to take care of things. And going back to that ACEs chart I had a little bit before, and that permanence, it can really have a great impact in having kids be able to have something that they care for themselves, and being able to really nurture something themselves that really can help in a lot of the healing process for a lot of our kids. So I am going to turn it over to Kevin now, and he's going to talk a little bit more about green schoolyards and some of the research that he is doing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. And this was perfect table setting where we got to hear about the Texas Children in Nature Network. We got to hear about the different health and well-being benefits of nature. And then we rolled into one of the interventions at play, green schoolyards. And so what I'd like to do here is share a completed project and its results where we have data specific to Central Texas. And so as Sarah had shown, we have data across the United States and even internationally looking at the benefits of nature for children in their households. Yet it is also important to have that context to that specific location and finding results there. So here is the Green Schoolyards Project. It is a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation funded project led by Melody Alcazar of City of Austin Parks and Recreation Department and myself at UTHealth. So kind of that practice plus research arm. And what you see here is a photo taken during data collection during this project. What you can see in this photo are children at a park. This is a school park, and they're under tree shade. What you cannot see in this photo is it was over 100 degrees when it was taken. Next slide. And one of the impetus for the Green Schoolyards Project is that Central Texas and truly the world is getting hotter, while Central Texas is already a warm climate. And so what you see here are data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which shows how temperatures are projected to increase over time in Travis County, which is where Austin is. This is the number of days above 95 degrees Fahrenheit under two different greenhouse gas emission scenarios. And intermediate emission scenarios where we're going to, across the world, continue emitting, while by 2040, there will be a precipitous decline in greenhouse gas emissions due to policies in place, and a high emission scenarios, the red line, which is continued greenhouse emissions through the end of the century. And what you can see is we have about 75 days a year currently above 95 Fahrenheit in Austin, while if you look out to 2100, that could increase by about 30 days each year, or it can increase, or not each year, sorry, by 2100, or it could increase twofold if you compare it to 2020. So 75 days versus 150 if you're looking at that high emission scenario. Next slide. And another piece of this work is that we do know there is a connection between extreme heat and human health. Here is a conceptual framework by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that shows the impacts of climate change on human health. In the inner ring, we see the major climate change impacts, including rising temperatures. In the middle ring, we see how these different impacts influence exposures, including extreme heat. And on the outer portion, we see how these different exposures impact health outcomes. Next slide, or next click. And so in this research on the green schoolyards, we specifically focus on the exposure of extreme heat and what that means for health outcomes. Next click. And the literature has disproportionately looked at the impact of extreme heat on heat-related mortality, rightfully so, because extreme heat leads to more deaths than all other weather-related disasters each year in the United States, and that's the same as Australia and a few other places. Yet what's been understudied is if extreme heat serves as a barrier to individuals engaging in physical activity, which we know is a health behavior that lowers the risk of several chronic diseases. Next slide. Another reason we chose to focus on temperatures, physical activity in green schoolyards is because children in Texas are not sufficiently active, and there are differences by race ethnicities. Here are some data from the Texas School Physical Activity and Nutrition Survey, which is a state representative, and it's for the percentage of Texas fourth graders that are reaching their physical activity guidelines, which is 60 or more minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity each day. We see that white and children in other race ethnicities not highlighted here are slightly or significantly more active than Black and Latino Texas fourth graders in terms of reaching the guidelines. Yet notice that all race ethnicities are dramatically below the percentage we'd like to see for those reaching the guidelines for health and well-being. Next. And so this begs the question, is extreme heat serving as a barrier to these children engaging in physical activity? Next. This brings us to the aims of the Green Schoolyards Project. It was to determine how green features, trees, gardens, and nature trails at elementary school parks impact temperatures within the parks, the physical activity levels of Latino children from low-income households, and how these children's psychological connection to nature relates to their social emotional learning skills. Next. The project took place at 3 joint use elementary school parks in Austin, so meaning they were open to the public outside of school hours. And we focused on schools that were serving over 85% economically disadvantaged Latino communities, and those communities that had low nature access, meaning they were at a distance from nature that was of quality. We focused on collecting data during 2 weeks in September and 1 week in November over 2 years, 2019 and 2020. We chose a week in September because that's a historically high temperature month during the school year. In November is a historically more potentially thermally comfortable month for comparison purposes. We measured green features, those trees, gardens, and nature trails, as well as shade, which could be from those same green features or from artificial shade structures, by digitizing, or we'll just call it drawing, polygons of that shade using high resolution aerial imagery within a geographic information system. At each of the 3 elementary school parks in the study, we measured air temperature and relative humidity by installing 10 weather stations per park. On the right-hand side, we see a photo of that one of those weather stations put onto a playground structure. Next. Here's a map of one of the 3 school parks, and it shows the boundaries of the park and where the different weather stations were sited within that park over those 2 years. Notice that we tried for an even spatial distribution across a park, so then we could estimate a continuous thermal profile of the temperatures for that park. And we also tried for different land covers, such as grass versus mulch versus pavement, as well as land uses, such as near the track or basketball court or playground. We didn't put site weather stations in spaces that would detract from the use of the space, such as in the middle of the soccer field, for obvious reasons. Next. The Green Schoolyards Project actually includes 2 separate studies. One study is a cross-sectional study, which looks at the which assesses the physical sites within the school park. We broke each park, the 3 parks, into what are called target areas. These are different areas that are defined by their different physical activity intentions, such as in that image here, we see number 5 is the middle of the soccer field. And number 8 is, or let's say number 9 is a playground structure. So we broke the park down into these different spaces, and then we used an instrument called the System for Observing Play and Recreation in Communities, where an individual, a data collector, goes to each of these sites and scans with their eyes and observes what they see. And they're expected to collect specific data that are on that form that we've created as a research instrument. They do this 4 times per day, morning, noon, afternoon, evening, to capture both school time use of the park and out of school time when the public's using the park. And the major outcomes of interest were physical activity, interactions with green features, such as were they under tree canopy or touching a tree, using a garden or a nature trail. And then because the second year of the project in 2020 in the fall actually fell during the COVID-19 pandemic, we also measured social distancing and mask wearing. Next. The second study within the Green Schoolyards project is focused on the children, where we enrolled 35 third graders and 35 fourth graders per school, so around 210 students total. And we tasked them during school recess, which is around a 20-25 minute period, to wear an elastic belt with 2 devices, an accelerometer that measures one's physical activity levels and a GPS unit that measures their movement in space and time. By having those 2 devices together during recess, we can then understand how physically active an individual was being as they move through space. These data were collected only during 2019 due to the COVID-19 pandemic disrupting data collection in 2020, yet we have data for 3 full weeks. Next. With those same students enrolled in the cohort study, those 215 or so across 3 schools, we tasked them with also filling out 2 different surveys, one of which they were already completing through the school district. The first is to understand their psychological connection to nature, and we did this by using the Connection to Nature Index, which is a survey that has 16 different items or questions that are on 5-point Likert scales of level of agreement. There were these statements, which you can see one in this slide here, and a child was tasked with picking their answer. And then to get an overall single score, it was just the average of the 16 questions to get that one score, 1 through 5. The outcome of interest was children's social emotional learning skills. And this is actually collected by a student climate survey by the school district, where there are 10 questions, and they ask questions around the 5 core competencies of social emotional learning, which are shown in the bottom right image of self-awareness, self-management, relationship skills, social awareness, and responsible decision-making. Next. So now let's show some results. And each of the results shown are published in different papers in peer-reviewed journals. The first is that we found heat index, which is a combination term for air temperature and relative humidity that captures how it really feels, differed across sites within each school park. Here is one park that was also shown in the previous images, and its heat index across September 2019. We see that the hottest spot in the park, shown in red in the bottom left image, is reached 114 degrees Fahrenheit during September. This was an unshaded playground shown in the top right image. Just 15 meters south is the coolest spot in the park, which was 10 degrees cooler than the hottest, and that's shown by a shaded playground in the bottom right image. Next. By observing the physical sites within each park using that System for Observing Play and Recreation in Communities, or SOPARC tool, we were able to understand the use of these parks by children before and during the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically the public's use of the park outside of school hours. We saw that there was actually a decrease across both girls and boys of using the park during the pandemic. In addition, most girls and boys were not social distancing, and almost everyone was not wearing face coverings. It's important to note that in fall 2020, when this took place, the different policies in place for COVID-19. What the policies were that school parks were open, they were accessible to the public, yet the playground structures were closed, yet there was no kind of policing of if individuals were following that kind of regulation. masks were not required outside, yet social distancing was a requirement. However, one limitation is through these observations, we weren't able to understand if the people who were near one another were family members or households that had been living together and quarantining together. Next question. Or sorry, next slide. And then here are the data from the children's recess where they wore those elastic belts with accelerometer and GPS device. What we found that as temperatures rose, children decreased their physical activity levels and they sought shade. So this figure here shows the percentage of daily recess time across average daily temperatures and the time spent in moderate to vigorous physical activity and the percentage of time spent in shade at recess. Around 91 degrees Fahrenheit is the inflection point where you see that a larger percentage of time what children were under the shade and not engaging in physical activity. Next. And lastly, we see that children's psychological connection to nature had a significant positive effect on their overall social emotional learning skills, which was the average of responses across those 10 survey items that we're looking at social emotional learning skills, along with specific competencies, self-awareness, self-management, and relationship skills. Next. So based on these results, we think this serves as evidence for some early recommendations, specifically around schoolyard design, as well as eventual policy. So in terms of schoolyard design, we can think about greening schoolyards, actually adding more tree canopy, et cetera. As what I didn't share in my results was that the park that had the highest amount of tree canopy cover, children spent 6% more time engaging in physical activity than the park with the least tree canopy. Second is adding shade to areas intended for physical activity. That could be a tree canopy that's covering a playground structure or even a shaded basketball court. Third is adding shade to areas intended for rest. We don't expect children to be active for 100% of the time, and there is reason to have some breaks. In addition, the primary caretakers of the children at that moment, either the teacher or their parent or whoever, they may appreciate a space where they can be protected from the heat of the sun. Next. And along with schoolyard design, we also think there's reason for changing schoolyard policies. First, related to the COVID-19 pandemic, it's ensuring policies align with the need of communities, such as having a mental break from the toll of the pandemic that parks could provide, and communicating those policies to the public, as there may have been some misunderstandings as there had been a shifting of policies with COVID-19 over time. Second is to schedule recess during more thermally comfortable times of day. So perhaps not scheduling it during 2 to 3 p.m. where you may see some reductions in physical activity due to the high temperatures. Third is to training school staff to organize shaded play on extreme heat days, such as a Frisbee game under a canopied area or playing basketball under a shaded basketball court. And then lastly, there's this idea of shifting recess to indoor spaces on extreme heat days. We don't think this is ideal because gyms, particularly at these schools, are already overutilized for different events and programming with the school. In addition, children and their families already spend a incredible amount of time indoors, and indoor settings have rather low access to nature. And so we want to make sure we encourage children and their households to get out in nature and accrue those benefits, but to do so safely as our temperatures are warming. Next. And none of this work could be done without all of these colleagues here who have significantly contributed to what we've been able to accomplish. First and foremost, Melody Alcazar, who's directing the project at the City of Austin Parks and Rec Department. Next. I think we're handing it over to Sara Coles to kind of wrap us up.
Yeah, so before we get into the Q&A, just wanted to give any of you who are on the call just a couple ways to get involved with my work, and then also if you're in the Austin area to work with Kevin as part of our Austin Regional Collaborative. We welcome all of you to join some of our regional collaboratives. As I said, we're all over the state, and I'll have my email address up in just a minute, and please feel free to email me to get involved in one of those regional collaboratives. Also, we offer webinars every month. In fact, we actually have one this afternoon after this on how to talk to kids about climate change with a therapist here in Austin is going to be talking about climate anxiety and some things we're seeing in kids for that. Also, in June, Kevin and Melody are going to be presenting some of their research through one of our webinars then as well. So if there's someone who didn't make today's call that you think they would find this interesting, please feel free to share that with them. We also have a health strategic area call where we are working on a document specifically for shacks, sharing this information so that they know why it's important to really put outdoor time as part of the school health plans. And you're welcome to join Texas Children in Nature Network. The only requirement for joining TCINN is that you want to get kids outside. And so we would love to have all of you as part of Texas Children in Nature Network. Oh, and we are getting ready, all geared up for our summit. So every year we host an annual conference. This year it's going to be in Houston, December 6th through 8th. And that session proposals for that is open right now. So we would love to hear from y'all in terms of our summit as well. But I think that we are all set for Q&A. I don't know, Michelle, how do you want to handle that?
Well, I asked if anybody had questions, they would put them in the Q&A or they could even put them in the chat. Have not gotten anything. So if you have questions, let's kind of give me a shout out and we'll certainly answer them. It's so good to have both of you with us. The statistics are a little startling. I think they really kind of open eyes to what's really going on out there. And then I loved hearing about the green schoolyard projects, and the things that you point out are all logical to me, and they should be done, and we should have those things taking place without having to mandate them or make policies around them. But we definitely have to spend time. Yep, you will get a copy of this presentation. There's a list of the studies. Should be part of that. Cheryl asks, how do we address the need for safe outdoor spaces for our children in the low SES neighborhoods outside of the school day?
So one of the great things about green schoolyards and what Austin ISD has termed as their green school parks is it's a great way to really increase the amount of public space that is available for children and families. So in Texas right now, we only have 5% public land, and that includes state parks, national parks, municipal parks. And so there's a lot of neighborhoods that do not have a park within easy walking distance of the residents of that neighborhood. But a lot of those neighborhoods do have schools. And so the idea behind the green schoolyards is that it's not just a green space for kids to play during the school day, but that area is open to the community outside of school hours. So it's available in the evening, it's available on the weekends. And so it's a great way to increase some of that outdoor time and space for those communities.
Okay.
Thank you. I think one addition I'd provide for that response to this question is the definition of safety for these outdoor spaces. And so there's a lot wrapped into that word, right? I think a lot of times when we think of safety, we may think of crime. We may also think about traffic-related injury. And I think both of those are essential to take into account, especially within these neighborhoods. It's also important to think about different exposures one is having, in the sense of, are they having disproportionate exposure to extreme heat in these settings, which has been shown through the urban heat island effect, which is disproportionately in areas of low economic status, as well as Black and brown neighborhoods. And so we have to attend to these also ambient environmental exposures in terms of safety, along with protecting against traffic-related injury and also any type of given crime in those settings. So lots to work on, but I think it all tends to making changes to the built environment and doing so in partnership with folks who have those dollars and the ability to move the policy to action.
There's two comments that were made. One of them is that Nan says the Living Schoolyard Act is being reintroduced to the Senate today, which is exciting. And we'll have to see how that goes. And then Cheryl mentioned that some of our students are restricted to play outside because of stray dogs. I think I've run into that a lot with my visiting with different districts, because after the pandemic, people weren't home to take care of their pets, and they have a lot of been turned outside. It's become a real epidemic of dogs. So it is kind of scary. And is there anything y'all have seen communities do to deal with stray dogs?
One thing that we work on with a lot of our cities that are part of what we call the Cities Connecting Children to Nature initiative, which Austin is a part of, Fort Worth is a part of, Houston, San Antonio, is really working on a city level to see how every department within a city is working to get children and families outside. And in the past, we have not been as active with animal control as we probably should have been. And so we're starting to engage more of the animal control departments as part of that conversation, exactly because of what you're talking about, Cheryl. That is a key part of getting children and families outside.
Anything you want to add, Kevin? Nope. And then Nan wants to know if there are any grants out there that support green schoolyards.
Oh, there's so many options. The funding, we've never been in such a space, but I guess I'll first tack onto the Cheryl response is with the dogs. I think dogs in general is an interesting kind of phenomenon where with physical activity, we see that actually owning a dog does end up, through walking your dog, allow you to accrue some physical activity benefit. And the other piece is with heat health. We've seen some instances where communicating about heat and the risk of heat-related injury, we could actually get at some community members through their dogs, in the sense of letting them know and alerting them to the safety issues for their dog, and therefore also ending up protecting themselves through that. So that's kind of an interesting phenomenon. I'm very curious about off-leash rules with dogs that, pet ownership, especially along green spaces that are linear in design. Because I know, in speaking in Austin, of some parks that have linear portions where, as someone who's a runner and cyclist, you have no choice but to use the same space and share it with a dog that's not on leash. And I think that leads to some interactions that may be unsavory at times. And so I think it's working alongside these parks and rec communities and these nonprofits that are stewards of these parks as to what best works for all users. And so that's a tough one to work on. In terms of the grant opportunities for green schoolyards, for lack of a better phrase, I think with climate change and public health, we've in the past been in more of a kind of beggar type mentality, where we haven't had as much opportunity to do that type of intersectional work. Now there's been a large wave of interest in intersectional type work with climate change, health, and equity. With green schoolyards, that is an intervention or a potential, let's call it, solution that provides a host of benefits. I can name over a dozen grant opportunities at the National Science Foundation, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Institutes of Health, along with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. One specific solicitation from them is called Evidence for Action. And each of these grants I've mentioned are rather large buckets of funds. This could be anywhere from, let's say, $300 to multi-million-dollar over a few years. There's also pilot funds to test out an idea, which for a smaller amount of resources, to then eventually expand on it once you create that early evidence you need to drive a larger project. So I'd be happy to talk with you offline about those opportunities.
And then Nan, I see you're with Houston ISD. One grant that just came out this last week that I think will really affect some of our bigger school districts is USDA just announced a huge tree planting grant. And so they are funding lots and lots of shade for our schoolyards.
Well, it's kind of funny because last year we got a grant from the Fruit Tree Planting Foundation and received almost 200 trees. 100 of them we planted. These were fruit trees, but 100 we planted on our farm. And then the community and the schools received the other other 100. So we're kind of running out of space for trees on our property, but we do have a 3-acre portion of it that's all trees. It's probably 100-year-old forest that nobody's done anything with. So we're cutting trails through it right now. We're seeking a grant from USDA for making the pathways wheelchair accessible too.
Oh, awesome.
So that will allow a better surface going through our farm and the nature area. But we're always looking for grants, so I would love to talk with you.
Awesome. I don't see any more questions. I do, excuse me. I think you mentioned this webinar for next week, Sarah. So we'll include this with the link in our follow-up email, which will probably go out on Friday. And then this webinar, along with others, are posted on YouTube. You can go there and find webinars on a multitude of topics that we have recorded over the last years, 10 years, 7 years. So we hope that you gain some knowledge and some information that will help you in your work to get kids outside and active. And we would love to see you. We'll be setting up our fall webinar series and sending out information on that sometime in the next month before summer hits. So enjoy the rest of the school year, and we hope to see you on a future learning session. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.